my Asperia Supreme Judge deck, bracket 3, and it was sitting at 70% win percentage.
What? I'm sorry, that's a what with the H? What did you just say? Dana, I had a deck that had played 5 games with and I won 100% of them.
You monster.
I think it would be reasonable to conclude for a lot of folks out there who are seeing numbers like this to be like, it's going a little bit too hard, right? What do you feel about that? Hello and welcome to the EDHRECast, where we're all about Commander, data, and dad jokes. I'm Joey Schultz, and I'm joined by my puntastic co-host. He actually gave the card Katara the Fearless the fear keyword, which created a time loop paradox. It's Dana Roach.
All this talk of stats made me remember that there are two kinds of people in this world. Those that can extrapolate information from an incomplete data set.
Well done, Dana. A joke that doesn't even need to be said aloud. It takes place entirely between my ears. I appreciate that. You're going very cerebral with your dad jokes this year. That's fun. Well, Dana, it's the two of us again on this episode because we're at part 2 now. Last week, we had an episode going over a bunch of our game data that we've been tracking for 3 years now.
Yeah.
We were going over some of the high-level stuff in that episode. Now we're going to get even more granular. You and I are looking into our individual deck by deck stuff here, and we're gonna dig even deeper. There was just so much stuff to get through. I'm excited for part 2 right here.
Yeah, and we talked about some of this last week, but let's kind of revisit some of the basic stats about how many games we actually played before we get any further into this.
100%.
And we have data from the last 3 years of how many games we played. What were your totals?
Yeah, in 2023, I played 217 games. In 2024, I played 141 games. And this past year in 2025, I played 175 games. What about you?
I'm going to be at 338 games I had in 2023. I had 318 in 2024. And this year, 332. So, yeah, we're staying at roughly consistent numbers between the two of us, but we're both playing a lot of games of EDH in the average year.
Yes, I actually want to shout out my buddy Charles, who's sort of like gotten me into a new play group with Irene and Bosco, actually, if folks know them. That's been a really lovely and rewarding space to kind of have a new group to play with. But that was actually, to start things off, that was an observation that we had in our last episode that is worth echoing here. There are different patterns with why these numbers, are going to be different. You play a lot more frequently with strangers at an LGS, whereas I tend to have more dedicated play groups that I see more frequently. It's not that you don't play with dedicated play groups, but you have a greater instance of games at an LGS with people that you don't know than I do. So there are going to, of course, be a lot of differences that emerge throughout our data, but that is kind of some stuff to give us context for all of these. One of the other things that I think is really going to be dug into even more in this episode is our win percentages, which have maintained some consistency over the past 3 years as well. Sure. I saw a slight increase. My first data entry, I had a 33% win percentage in 2023, 34 in 2024, and then this past year in 2025, my win percentage was 36%. So slightly above average if you expect that in a 4-player game, the average win percentage should be 25%. You noted a higher number, and I think that might be something that we unpack a little bit more today.
Yeah. I was at 41% win percentage in 2023, 44 in 2024, and then just a minor dip to 43% in 2025.
Yeah.
And that's, we talked about this a little bit last year and a little bit last week as well. And that's a higher percentage than you yourself would be comfortable with.
Yeah, it is, to me, the kind of thing that makes me worry that I would be punching too hard. But I think that's what this episode can be a way for us to find, all right, which decks are responsible for those figures? We noted that playing against Stranger might give you certain advantages of these are decks that people don't know they don't know the Achilles heels of, compared to a regular play group is gonna know your Achilles heels, and I think that would be a factor for sure. But I also am interested in the individual deck breakdowns and which decks are helping you with that percentage and which ones are having a lower. That way we can get a sense of how our decks are performing over the year.
Yeah, and to the question about win percentage too, this is one of the things I've been conscious of in the last few weeks as I knew we were going to be doing this show. So I've asked different friend groups as we've been playing, about power levels of decks. And one thing that someone noted that I thought made a lot of sense was that he said, I tend to play decks that lean into my strengths and lean into the bracket I play at more so than most people they see. So like I'm someone who tends to sandbag isn't maybe the right word, but like play things that are unassuming. And when I'm playing commanders that are unassuming, and I tend to play stylistically in a way that's unassuming, it just benefits me. Like I'm playing to my strengths in how I brew, how I build, how I play. I think probably more than most people, and that definitely gives me an edge as well. Like I think there's just a lot of little things here that add up. Whether or not that justifies a 40% win rate or not, I guess I don't know. But like I do think there are a lot of factors here that do come into play.
You give me a teamer deck and I won't know what I'm doing, but you give me aristocrats.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
But let's get into some of the individual components that make up these broader things. Let's start breaking down and like actually trying to analyze the games that we played. Let's start off with which of our decks were the most played. I'll start off with my data here. My most played deck of the year. No surprise, it's Baba Saga. Everyone knows that I'm in love with this absolute crone of a hag. I adore her so much. Golgari Aristocrats kind of stuff. I played her 18 of my 175 games. I can't get enough of her. But weirdly, the next highest thing that I played was actually precons. I played 17 games using precons this year, either against other precons or sometimes I would play a precon into another space, such as a bracket 2, and sometimes even bracket 3 games. It was a really good year for precons, 2025. Like I had a bunch of fun with like the Titus precon was super great. The Tarkir Dragonstorm precons were fantastic. Like I really enjoyed playing with precons last year, so I kind of couldn't get enough of them apparently.
Whereas I didn't play a single precon this year.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, and it's nothing against the precons. It's just a situation where like if I'm going to play, I just want to play my deck, and I tend to brew specifically versus like seeing a precon deck and tweak it just the way I play. So I don't have any on my list, and I'm going to guess that's not going to change just from how I approach building decks and approach brewing and playing. It's just, to me, it doesn't appeal to me.
You look at a precon and you're like, you're not my real dad. You can't tell me what to do.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah, very much so.
The third entry on my list was also a surprise to me. I built Sid, the Timeless Artificer, the Azorius pump up your heroes and your artifact creatures for each artificer you control or artificer in your graveyard. I didn't realize I played him this much. I played 15 games with Sid, and I looked at that and I was like, this must be wrong. And I recalculated myself. I'm like, there's no way that I did this much. But apparently that was a deck that I really enjoyed. I think particularly because I built this so deliberately as a bracket 2 deck. Well, and also because the art that I'm using for this deck, well, let's be honest, that man in that art, even Prof calls him Daddy Sid. So I'm sure that joke was also an influential factor in me wanting to play the deck too. But the main thing is that this deck became like my go-to bracket 2 deck. When like so many people were playing new amazing precons this year, this was a de facto deck to grab because it's a very simple strategy. The wins are very telegraphed, which is reinforced by my next deck that I played the most, also 15 games, is my Commander deck, my Tana and Timna deck, which has a significant restriction where every card in the deck must say the word Commander on it, but which also plays, decently. Tana and Timna are still both really good commanders, even when you have a restriction on your mana base and on the cards in the deck. So those tend to be my bracket 2 kind of things. And I guess I played a lot more of them than I thought I did. It was just kind of funny to note like, oh, here's a thing that I didn't realize I had done quite that much. So a fun number there. I'll round out my top 5 with the 5th type of deck that I played the most often were decks that I borrowed. I actually borrowed a lot of decks this year in games as well. So that was kind of an interesting thing to see. But those are my top 5. My Babala Saga, Precons, Sid, my Commander deck, and decks that I borrowed. And almost all of those caught me by surprise, which is just very funny. With the exception of Baba, I did not see a lot of those coming.
So my top 5, starting off with Dromoka the Eternal at 32 games I played.
It's your Selesnya Dragons deck, yeah?
Selesnya Dragons, and in hindsight, I guess I understand why. I loved Tarkir Dragonstorm this year, and it gave me a bunch of toys. Like, you don't frequently get new green and white dragons. And I did in this particular set. I also got cool new basic lands. We get those dragon-themed basic lands and that were just like fun to put into the deck. And then when Edge of Eternities came out, as well as Final Fantasy, because of the bolster ability on Dromoka, I've kind of built a deck with a +1 counter sub-theme, just because a lot of the dragons in those colors tend to have +1 counters. So like I've leaned into that a little bit. And both Final Fantasy and Edge of Eternities gave us quite a bit of support because those were themes in those 2 sets as well. So despite this being a deck that's relatively old for me, it does have a lot of cards in it that were new to this deck, right? Like I got a bunch of new toys in this deck this year. So it was just something I played a lot because it was fun, because it got a fresh coat of paint.
Yeah.
The second one for me was Felisa, Fang of Silverquill. It's a deck I built, I think, at the end of last year. So one of my newer lists, and I just really enjoyed playing it. Like, it's one of those things you tend to want to play with the new toy you get, and this very much was a new toy. So this was one that got a lot of reps from me. So it was just one game behind Jamocha at 31. Number 3 was Agnes, which is my mono red haste deck. It's a Jund commander, but I'm playing it as mono red. And this one is one I tend to break out when I'm playing people that I'm like not super familiar with.
Yeah.
Because Agnes is so straightforward. I'm just swinging at you with hasty creatures. Like, there's nothing complicated in my game plan, really. Being mono red, I don't have access to some of the things that I otherwise have access to. So, like, this is my safe deck, kind of. And that's why it got a lot of reps. If I'm playing in a space where I don't know people, this is one I can not really worry too much about being something that all of a sudden blows up and, like, freaks people out for doing things they weren't prepared for.
Right, fair. It strikes me that actually of your top 5, the bottom 3 are all monocolor decks. You had built Agnes as mono red, but then your number 4 is Caliphate, the Beloved of the Sea, which is a mono blue Voltron deck. You're using the Devotion to Blue to power up your commander. And then you also have Thrun, which is a mono green deck, also a little bit Voltron-y. So you made a strong entry for the monocolor here, Dana.
Yeah, and I think at this point, I don't know if I have any deck in my arsenal that isn't mono or 2. I just don't like playing with too many colors, in part because, like, it's too many choices to make. I just don't want to make choices about brewing. It's just so much easier to build 1 or 2 colors.
Yeah. Looking
at my list, two color decks and 3 monocolor decks. And Thrun had 20 games, Caliphate had 23. So those were my top 5.
I do think it's worth pointing out, you mentioned there's sort of this like, ooh, a shiny new toy syndrome with some of these. Like, you had just gotten new pieces for your dragon deck, so that's why you were so eager to play a whole lot of those. My most recent deck that I've built has been my Avatar Kyoshi deck that's doing mono green earthbending stuff. There's only been a limited amount of time since the Avatar set came out that I've been able to play it. Despite that, I've played it 11 times. It did not make it into my technically most played, but it also was only around for like a month and a half or whatever for me to do that. And even then, it was like the thing that I couldn't wait to keep playing. I do notice within my data here that I have a trend of like, whatever I just built, I can't freaking wait to keep playing that. So there's like a lot of new energy here. I think if I were to combine like the tail end of last year with when I had built my winter deck, which I played 13 games with winter this year, but if I had combined that with like the energy that I had around the end of last year too, also for the stretch of time right after Duskmorn had come out, I was playing that deck nonstop. But the reason this is important to me to observe is like, this should remind me to pace myself so that I don't burn out on a deck that I just made and get tired of it within just a couple of months. I hope that doesn't happen to me with the new decks that I build and then put this much playing energy towards. So that's just something that I kind of observe here that is really echoed with what you mentioned about like, oh, it's a shiny new toy, I got these new things. It's good when that reinvigorates, but I hope it doesn't burn us out.
Well, and you mentioned your Avatar deck as well. Like, I built one from that set, Katara, Water Tribe's Hope. You had 11 games with yours. I had 10 with mine.
Yeah.
So yeah, those are both our 2 newest decks and saw a lot of play. It's just that because they didn't come out until late this fall, we're limited to how many games we had out. I would wager if both those decks would have came out in July or something, both those commanders, they'd be near the top of our list. Just again because we want to play the new cool thing.
Yeah. Well, and going into this next year, I guess I tell a little bit of a fib. Like, let's move now to the decks that we played the least this year. One of the decks that I also built this past year was Twee and Law, which is the mono blue fish. I'm trying to build it as Fish Voltron. Whenever they become tapped, you draw a card. When they're untapped, you get a +1 counter on them. I built that one also very recently, but I haven't gotten a great big showing with it. I only got 3 games in with it in this past year, so it is technically my least played deck of last year, but also it was around for a very short time. I built that basically at the same time as Kyoshi, but Kyoshi took up like the bulk of my attention. Avatar Kyoshi was the one that was like, me, like I'm the thing I'm going to be playing right now. But I can't wait to play this other monocolored deck of mine. Can't wait to put a whole bunch of energy into for future games. But then when I look at the other decks that I played the least this year, I have a Skoa mono red deck, which I also played 3 games with. It's a commander that's not really supposed to work in Commander. Comes in, does damage, mono red, very simple, very fun. And also my Dr. Hoomst deck, which is a rule 0 deck that I'm doing like time counter stuff with. I also only played 3 games with this year. I still had fun every time that I played them, but it's interesting to me. I actually would have sworn before I was tracking this manually, I thought I had played these more than I did. Maybe I'll make a more conscious effort to make sure that there's something that I want to keep around and to play more often. What are your least played decks of the year?
I have a handful of them that are like under 5 here as well. It's worth noting 2 of them are ones that I took apart. One was one I built this year, Minthara, and I just didn't enjoy the play pattern, so it only got 4 games before I gave up on it. One is my Minskin Boo deck, which was a fling deck I've had for a lot of years, and I just got bored with it. I don't know really what switch flipped there, but I just didn't want it anymore. So those only had a couple games. My Veil of the Nightclad deck, which is a very old deck, I don't know why I only played 2 games. That was one of those ones I didn't realize I'd only played a few times.
Yeah.
But yeah, I only played that twice. Maybe because it's just a deck I've just played a lot. And because I believe the first time we did stats on our games, I think it was my most played deck that year. It might have been 2019 or so. That might be part of it too. I played it a lot, when I first had it, and I've just maybe, I don't know if I've gotten bored with it is the right word, but yeah, so it's just one I tend to not grab. My Athreos deck only got 2 plays. That isn't really surprising. It's a Pestilence deck, and it's maybe not a lot of fun for people because once I get to the position where I have control of the board and have a Pestilence out, it's very tough for people to actually play their creatures. So I tend to only play that in trusted situations where I know I'm playing with friends or people that aren't going to be bothered by that kind of gameplay.
Right.
And the other 2, my Recce deck, just because I don't play in bracket 4 very often, so I tend to only break it out when I'm in that power level. It's just gotten very strong. Or if somebody requests it, I'll play it. And I have a new deck, Jorn God of Winter, that I built as a Helix Pinnacle deck. And the problem with that one early on was because it's a hidden commander-ish deck, you have to have X amount of tutors in it to be able to find that commander consistently. With the first iteration of the bracket system, bracket 2, you didn't want to have many tutors, so it was a bracket 3 deck, and it just couldn't hang. Trying to win with Helix Pinnacle in bracket 3 was very difficult to do. So I played it a few times, and I was kind of retooling it, trying to figure out what I was going to do. When they changed the tutor thing for brackets, I'm like, well, now I can run Diabolic Tutor and a couple other mediocre tutors in bracket 2 to get it consistently. So once that change happened, I started playing it a few more times, and I would imagine next year I'll play that deck even more because it is a lot of fun. The problem was it just wasn't suited for the bracket it had to be in when you couldn't run many tutors in bracket 2.
I think I'm going to grab onto there, Dana. There's a texture here that I appreciate you layering into the conversation. We mentioned new deck energy earlier as being a big driving force of what makes us want to play certain decks. But your example there of other changes, like the brackets being a stimulus that prompts you to play things a little bit more, that's a really important ingredient when observing what drives us as players to play which decks. And for folks watching and listening, I think that's really the meat to consider here in this conversation, to try and grapple with what are the things that influence what you play and why. Is it the release of a new set? Is it that you got new sleeves? I noted ages ago that excessive shuffling from playing a lot of fetch lands made me subconsciously stop reaching for an older deck of mine quite as often as I usually did. But that took me some time to suss out that was the reason why I wasn't grabbing it as often. Those small factors are not obvious just by looking at the numbers, but that is what I'd like to invite folks to consider here. And also, of course, if folks are curious about what it is that's making it into each of our EDH decks, the deck lists are linked in the description of every video, or you can go to architect.com/EDHRECast to find them that way too, and see, what new stuff we've been brewing.
So we talked a little bit about how much we played these decks, but I think maybe more importantly, it's how often these decks manage to win games.
Yeah, because Dana, some of our decks did really well this year. Some folks have actually speculated they're doing too well, actually. So that'll be the next big chunk of the conversation. But before we get to it, first, we've got to do some shout-outs before we tackle how successfully our decks performed in 2025, and of course, what that means for us in 2026.
We are excited to be teamed up with Dragon Shield moving into 2026. Being able to put Ur-Dragon sleeves on your Ur-Dragon deck is a big deal to a lot of people. Between those in the Landfall series featuring Fetchlands from Tarkir, there are so many great options now with officially licensed WotC art, and there's a bunch more on the way. Just go use the promo code EDHREC in all lowercase at dragonshield.com to get 5% off your next purchase. It helps the show, and it helps your cards stay safe.
This show is also brought to you by you, our patrons at patreon.com/EDHRECast. I mentioned this last week. If you want to track your data, we are working on a Patreon perk to give our patrons access to a data tracking spreadsheet that is super easy and that will automatically calculate all of the data that we're talking about in this episode. It will automatically calculate that stuff for you. So consider supporting us on Patreon for access to stuff like that coming up, and all of our other amazing perks too, from exclusive content to Discord access. Your support in totally free ways means so much. leaving a review, liking videos, subscribing on YouTube, and we're really thankful for the folks who support us on Patreon too. In fact, let's shout out one of them right now. Andy Song, big ups to you. Thank you for listening, watching, supporting, and we hope that you're having a dang good one. Okay, Dana, we've gone over the decks that we've played the most and the decks that we've played the least, but that's just how often we played them. Now let's talk about how they did. Which are the decks of yours that performed the best over the course of the year? Their win percentages.
So the highest win percentage I had was my Asperia Supreme Judge deck, bracket 3, and it was sitting at 70% win percentage.
What? I'm sorry, that's a what with the H? What did you just say? 70% is crazy, Dana. That's
70% for a Sphinx Kindred deck with an average mana value around 3.8, I think.
I mean, yeah, nearly all your creatures in that deck are like 5 and 6 drops.
Yeah.
Well, it's doing really dang well for itself. Okay.
But that's a good example of a deck that plays into my strength, though. Like I can kind of play slowly, and the other threats in the table soak up people's resources, and then all of a sudden I've got 3 or 4 5 power creatures with evasion and 9 lines of text on each of them, because that's how Sphinxes work. And that's just how that deck kinds of play out, and that's something that plays into my strengths. And it's a deck filled with cards people don't traditionally see, with a commander that doesn't see a whole ton of play. It's a perfect example of kind of the way I tend to brew and the way I tend to play, and it has worked out very nicely for me, at least last year.
I have a pending question, but let's get to a couple of other figures before we go too much further. How about some of your other big performers this year?
Arden and Essior, my also an Azorius deck, equipment Voltron, and that's sitting at 66%. So two out of 3 games I wind up winning with that. And the last one that has a really high percentage is the Dromoka the Eternal deck. 62% of games I won with that as a bracket 2 deck.
And those are games that you had at least, I think you had like 10 games minimum for each of those?
Yeah.
So, okay, like a decent chunk of sample size there. Knowing those figures, the question to me feels like, do these decks need a better challenge? Is this potentially actually a bracket mismatch? As in, to you, it feels like a bracket 3, but maybe it actually should be being played in bracket 4, or Dromoka feels like a bracket 2, has no game changers, etc., but it actually probably belongs in a bracket 3 space. Like, I think it would be reasonable to conclude for a lot of folks out there who are seeing numbers like this to be like, it's going a little bit too hard, right? What do you feel about that?
The one that stands out is definitely Dromoka, in particularly for the reasons I talked about earlier, where I just got a bunch of new toys for it. It's a deck where I was able to add probably half a dozen dragons that were significant upgrades over the ones I was running in it previously, as well as a handful of really good spells that interact with +1 counters that were in either Final Fantasy or Edge of Eternities. And hey, those basic lands are rad too. This is one I will definitely reclassify as a 3 moving forward. I would say the first chunk of the year, it was probably a 2, but the improvement in just cards like being able to swap from mediocre Dragon A to very good Dragon B, and having done that a dozen times or 15 times this year, definitely changed how the deck played. And that's one that I'd say definitely should get bumped up to a 3, and will be doing so moving forward. Whereas Asperia and Arden and Essior, I think would really struggle competing in bracket 4. There's a reason you just don't see Voltron decks showing up in bracket 4 very often. Definitely hoping to play 6-drop Sphinxes and hit people in the face in bracket 4 is probably not a thing that flies there.
Well, it does fly there, because Asperia is flying, and so do all just for the record.
As well as Essior also flies there.
Yeah.
So I don't think those 2 decks are really bracket 4 decks. I think they're just ones that with my play style and how I play and where I play and what I do and the amount of reps I get, they just work really well in my hands.
Well, then we'll have footage of our decks on screen so that folks can evaluate them, linked in the description, yada yada. But to quickly tell you some of my reactions when I looked over your decks, for Dromoka, I definitely look at the way that it is now, and I see a level of thoughtful craft that I definitely associate with bracket 3. But as you said, this is a deck that changed a lot. Mm-hmm. I'm seeing it after all those changes, and you already copped that you think through the year this deck was miscategorized. Going through another example, though, like your Asperia, I'll say for that one, it felt accurate to me. Like, I didn't look at it and get this feeling of, oh, Dana's pulling a fast one, and this is actually a bracket 4. No, this looks like a bracket 3 to me. A strong 3, like, I think it's very fully embracing and filling out the entire box of what a 3 is capable of. Maybe I'd say it that way.
Yeah.
But it doesn't have the characteristics of what I associate with a bracket 4. Tutors, combo lines, cutthroat gameplay. No, this is just like a lot of chonky sphinxes that are carefully poised to protect themselves and to outlast the table. I think folks should definitely check out these decks and let us know whether they agree with us evaluations. Let us know. But so like all of that is to say, Dana, even if Asperia is a very truly bracket 3 deck, should you try playing it up a bracket anyway because of how well it's performing? Like if she's performing like a black belt, why stay in a space that is full of a bunch of green belts? In my head, it's like, where's the fun in that? Or like just because Voltron is harder to pull off in bracket 4, why not play Arden and Essie or there anyway, since you're already winning more than half of their games where they're currently at? Why not try the struggle? Why not aim for more of the challenge instead of staying in a place where, frankly, the deck is already overperforming?
Yeah, I mean, maybe the problem would be I just don't encounter bracket 4 decks or spaces to play it very often. So yeah, I mean, maybe because there is that factor. At some point, are you responsible for how the deck plays in your hands and how that impacts the power level? Mm-hmm. You mentioned last week when we had played some games with Joseph Johnson earlier this year, mm-hmm. He didn't have enough of his decks to go around, so you played your, was it bracket 3?
My Baracus deck, yeah.
And wound up winning the game.
Yeah.
I was playing an objectively much stronger deck than yours, one of Joseph's bracket 4 decks, but I never played it before. It's not a play style I'm really familiar with or what I do. Mm-hmm. And I could maybe play that deck 15, 20 more times and still, like, it doesn't play the way I like to play. It doesn't do the things I want to do. In my hands, I'm not sure the deck's ever going to play the way it plays in Joe Johnson's hands. And because your Bracos deck is a deck that you play a lot and are used to and does play into your strengths, it played much stronger in that environment.
Significant familiarity, sure.
So his strong deck played worse in my hands, and your objectively weaker deck played better in your hands in that environment. I mean, it's a real thing, and we had a good example of it right there.
I mean, I feel you on the availability thing. Like, we haven't even gotten to my data yet, but the decks that I played the least last year were my bracket 1 deck and my bracket 4 decks, just because I didn't have as many opportunities to use them. So yeah, even if I had a deck that I did want to ratchet up to bracket 4, it becomes that thing of like, okay, where do I play it then though?
Right.
Most of the people that you and I both meet want to play in the 2 and the 3 spaces. And frankly, so do we. Probably you and I both have, though, like a bracket 3 deck, but a bracket 4 player syndrome going on here. And like very clearly also, just because a deck wins a lot doesn't mean that the people in those games felt like it was a stomp. You know, a deck winning a lot is a very different thing to a deck winning in a way that the entire table did not like. Like, those are very different things. So let's make that clear. And of course, for you, like, who doesn't love to win games? I think, though, when I'm looking at all of the data that we've assembled here with sort of this bird's eye lens that we're afforded at the end of the year, it feels to me like an invitation for more self-analysis. Like, a piece of me looks at your numbers and worries maybe more than just the Dromoka deck might be miscategorized. But like, that's something that you mentioned before we even started recording. Right. Dromoka's just kind of been our big banner example here. Or a piece of me wonders like, hey, what other things could be part of a pregame conversation to make sure that expectations are getting set? That's a variable that is not represented in the data that we have here. And that's something that maybe could be dialed up or dialed down. And I don't know, like, I think the reason that I end up focusing on this so much, Dana, is because what I crave ends up being the challenge. Like, a little more struggle can help prevent things from stagnating. That's my mindset. Like, that's where I'm coming from. And when I win too much for the deck, I fall out of love with it. So I don't want that to happen to you. And you know what, actually, Dana, is it cool if we get to literally that example here, if we move to my data now?
Sure.
That's just your data. We haven't even gotten to my data. I'm about to, eat a whole lot of crow here. Dana, I had a deck that had played 5 games with and I won 100% of them.
You monster.
Yeah, so like, I also had the same kind of thing happen this year. I built a Genova deck this year. I played 5 games. I won all 5 of those games, and I took the deck apart after that because it made me uncomfortable. It was like, it was like that Twilight Zone episode, A Nice Place to Visit, I think is the name of it, where a guy goes and he's like winning at all the casinos and stuff, and he's unchallenged completely, and he's like, oh, this is actually kind of boring, and it turns out that's hell. That's kind of how this deck felt to me. It's like, I kept winning with it, unsatisfied as a result. I wanted more of the challenge. So yeah.
Sure.
And you know what strikes me about this is that the deck isn't even anything special. Like, it's pretty budget even. Like, there's no game changers in it, but I still think it's pretty bracket 3 territory. Like, it's honestly, though, just like a very simple +1 counter Golgari deck. Genova tags a creature, and then when that creature dies on your turn, you'll draw a lot of cards. So you just grow like a Fairy Bladecrafter or a Giggling Skitterspike, and their abilities will deal like 40 damage to everybody. Or you use Essence Harvest to drain someone's life equal to your creature's power, or like a Pathworker, Ibex, Overwhelming Stampede type of situation to go lethal. But like, those are really simple play patterns. It's really nothing special. I'm very reminded of your Dromoka deck's success in a similar way here. We've got some success with +1 counters this year.
Right.
But anyway, yeah, I think ultimately I've just felt like once I had done the thing with Genova that many times, I was no longer getting the challenge that I liked.
Right.
I was like, I think I'd just rather give up the Ghost on this one. I don't think I'm going to end up playing it, and I've kind of seen what it can do now, so I did end up taking that one apart. So I had 100% a win rate with Genova, but then I tossed her.
Well, in your Mimeoplasm deck, no slouch either in the win percentage department.
Yeah, I also had 5 games with that one. That one is a definite dedicated bracket 4 deck. I played 5 games with that one. I won 3 of them, so a 60% win rate there. My Yannette deck, I played 4 games, and I had I won 2 of those, so that's a 50% win rate. I do think it's worth noting here that each of these is only a 5-game sample size, which isn't a whole lot compared to yours. You had at least 10 games with all of the figures that you just mentioned, and across most of your decks, you had significantly higher than I did. So these are just, across the entire year. Some of the more significant figures that have a bigger sample size that I think maybe we can draw more conclusions from. My Thalise deck I had 7 games with, and I won 3 of them, so 42% wins with her. An interesting figure, of the 14 games that I played where I had borrowed a deck from someone, I won 6 of those, so I had a 42% win rate on those as well. So if you lend me a deck, watch out, apparently. I'm going to become Dana Roach and have a higher win percentage from what it seems. And then also my Celeste and my Baby Lasagna deck also did pretty well, nearing the 40 to 38% win range there. So I had a couple of things that were going well that had at least like 10 plus games. Celeste, I played 10 games. Babala Saga, I played 18 games with them. Even my Avatar Kyoshi deck, actually, I played 11 games with her and won 4 of those. 36% win percentage. It's much swingier in the things that have only like 4 games or only 5 games. That's a small sample size, so even a single win or loss really throws the figures all out of whack there. So again, worth taking all of these with a big grain of salt.
Now, you have an interesting note here on your Avatar Kyoshi deck, that it won a lot of games up front, but people kind of caught on to it.
Yes, this is something that echoes again what we mentioned up top. You play against strangers more often. I don't. My Avatar Kyoshi deck, the first 3, maybe even the first 4 games that I played with it, it was the first 3 games that I played with it. I won the first 3, and I was like, whoa, I'm about to have another Genova problem going on here. And then as I kept playing it with those same groups, they were like, okay, well, we know the Achilles heel now. We know how to stop this. We know the pressure points.
Sure.
And that made things really swing back in a different direction. And I personally anticipate that as time goes on and I play again with those groups, it's going to continue that swing and equalize out a whole lot more. I think it was a really good demonstration of that surprise of like, people don't know what to expect from this quite yet and how hard it can actually go. Kyoshi comes down, you Earthbend 8, and Earthbend's a really good mechanic, and just here's a bunch of +1 counters, and if you're doubling, which I like to do, then things hit pretty dang hard, and it could sort of take people off guard. But now they know the lay of the land. Literally the lay of the land. There's a bunch of lands in the deck. I'm making my lands into dudes. So now they know the lay of the land, and it's easier for them to anticipate what my movements are going to be and to see all of those things coming. Compared to your experiences, you don't have quite as many of those opportunities because you're playing against folks who you may not ever play against again. So I think that's a really good demonstration of like some of the things that can lead to bigger win percentages and stuff. This is a deck that had a really good first showing, but over time is, I think, getting smoothed out, which is going to be a little bit less often the case for you with your traditional opposition. So just a thing for folks to keep in mind, I think.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because playing that deck against a different crowd consistently, you might well be looking at 9 of 11 games that you've won or something, like because people don't have a chance to figure out what those weak spots are.
Which, the element of surprise, that's a thing that we've done a whole episode about. It works really dang well in your favor when you have it. So that's a thing that I feel like a lot of your decks really specialize in.
Absolutely. 100%.
But that repeated exposure could be the kind of thing that helps people clock it.
So, okay, we talked about our decks that did the best. What decks of yours, Joey, performed the poorest in games you played?
Yeah, I kind of hinted at this last week. One of these is a little bit of a bummer, but I think it actually really accentuates the point we were just talking about. Tui and Law has won 0 of the 3 games I've played with it. That is only 3 games. It's a very new deck, so discount that however you feel. And then also my Marina Vendrell and my Sir Conrad deck, a bracket 1 and a bracket 4. And I do kind of think that there's a more interesting story going on with each of those. So bracket 1 Marina Vendrell deck. I won 1 of the 6 games that I played with it, 16% win percentage there. And this I think is pretty obvious. Like, I couldn't. It's hard to find a bracket 1 space where everyone is definitely playing bracket 1. It's more often going to be like I'm playing a 1, they're playing a 1, and then 2 other people playing a bracket 2. Like it's naturally not going to be a super even match. It's still a fun deck. I absolutely love it, but it's also I'm not playing that deck to win a whole bunch with it. I'm playing to build a haunted house. It's a very silly theme. But the other deck that won the least often this particular year was Sir Conrad. I played 6 games with him too, and I only won 1 of them. 16% win with him. And again, kind of a tiny sample size here, and he's done better in previous years, but I think that is definitely a good example of a commander that people see it and they know what he's about, so they don't let him. Compared to something unexpected. People know what Conrad's going to do, so they're like, no. And it draws so much attention so early that it can't really keep up with him being such a known factor.
Well, and I think that extends to the next couple of your worst performing decks as well. Tana and Timna, both very recognized powerhouse commanders, and Wilhelt, I think, is the most popular zombie commander in those colors.
For sure.
So, like, even if you are in a situation where you are playing, you know, at an event or something, or go to an LGS and playing with people that don't know you, they know those commanders and know that they're a threat and know they're a problem. So that's also something that like is a factor for you. Whereas when I'm playing almost all relatively unknown commanders for the most part, it helps me in a way that it doesn't help you.
Right. People know the lay of the land when it comes to zombies or whatever, compared to Selesnya dragons. I don't know that I've ever seen that before with that Jamoka deck over there, Dana.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's definitely something there. Each of those will help. I played 11 games, won 3 of them, 27% win percentage there. Tana and Timna, my commander deck, I won 26% of the 15 games that I played there. So yeah, on the lower end, but also that's hitting exactly the notes that I want it to with them. So like that's very, very fine with me. But the Conrad in particular stands out as like this guy's got such a reputation that it's impossible to dispel that. I go into him, it's a bracket 4 deck. People are doing bracket 4 things, and everyone's also like naturally afraid of what Conrad can do. But within that space, if you have a reputation in a place where everyone's playing Cutthroat, Conrad, in the way that I built him right now, is not holding up nearly as well. So that's a thing that could be actionable for me to be like, all right, cool. Can I rearrange the deck in some way that accounts better for the fact that people see Conrad, shudder, and then know to deal with it? Can the rest of the deck make up for that dynamic in some way? Hopefully the answer is yes, my poor boy here. But it does, I think, really lean into what we had just been noticing about like the surprise element of unexpected and like versus knowing an Achilles heel and all of that we touched on earlier with some of our more successful decks. Anyway, that was some of my least successful, my least winning of the year. Dana, let's get to yours. Which of your decks performed the worst in 2025?
So first one, Jorn God of Winter that I mentioned, my Helix Pinnacle deck, 25% win rate. I think it was 4 games total, and the last one was the win. So like it lost the first 3 games. I played it this year and got its fourth game on it being a win. And that was post retool. So like I went from playing this in bracket 3 where I'm like slamming my head up against, Ur-Dragon lists and, Kali the Vast lists. And once I was able to bump it out of bracket 2 and able to like face off against, Kemba, Ka Regent decks, much more equal footing. And I'm going to guess this deck, is going to probably perform a little better moving forward just because that's a space that's more suited to play in where my entire goal was to try to, like, I have no way to win in that deck that isn't Helix Pinnacle.
Other than Helix Pinnacle.
Yeah. So I think that will probably play better. It's just that was a situation where the deck was just finding its footing. It was new this year. I just had to kind of figure out what I wanted to do with it. I mentioned my Minthara deck. That was a 25% win rate, and I was actually surprised that it had that high of percentage. I was playing that as an infect list, and there was just too many things that didn't work. It was very clunky. So that was just a situation where I was surprised I got the one win that I did with that particular list.
Those ones had pretty small sample sizes, though. You're saying you didn't get a whole lot of games with them.
Yeah.
What about the decks where you had like at least 10 games with them that didn't perform as well?
So the lowest performing ones where I actually played it a significant amount of time were Glissa the Traitor and Silumgar Drifting Death, both of which are very old decks of mine. Glissa won 30%, Silumgar was at 33%. That's, I think, well within what you would expect someone who plays a lot of games to win. That doesn't seem outside the norm. And those also weren't ones I played. Like those were, I played more than 10 games, but those were also in the maybe 12 to 14 range for both of those lists. So Silumgar's won plenty of games in the past, as has that Glissa list. So like it's just a matter of, it's just the particular matchups on a night make a big difference for a lot of the decks.
For sure. Yeah. I do still ultimately come away looking at all of this stuff, Dana. I still come away with the underlying feeling that whenever I play a game against you, I am gunning for you hard.
Sure.
Your decks do well, and I mean, I need to not fool myself. This guy's his decks are clearly very good, or the way that he plays them is really, really good. So I need to make sure that I am accounting for that when I play against you.
Now I will say this: this is something you've known though in the past as well. How well has that worked out?
We haven't played that many games this year, Dana.
So one thing, and the reason I say that is because I've had folks tell me, like, I know you're a problem, but I still have to deal with that thing because, like, I can't let that person swing with Kalia, even though I know you're going to be an issue. Or, like, I can't let that person put a bunch of elves up with Lathwil. And I think that's one of the things that helps me a ton is even though I am a threat, I'm a threat in a way where you still are forced to choose the other more threatening threat.
Yeah. There's another
They have to deal with your Conrad.
Yes. Yeah. When there's folks doing the Conrad or the Miram or all of those big obvious ones, it takes up, that's where the spotlight goes. And you're very good at harnessing, they're not paying attention to me. Cool, then I can do all this stuff. I'll wait till that
Absolutely. I completely lean into that.
Yeah. There is another piece of this too, though, that I feel like I want to make sure that I bring this up as another element to it. We also know that you build, quote, hipstery type of decks. For instance, your Caliphate deck. That is a mono blue enchantment deck where actually everything in the deck needs to be a permanent that stays in play. You have no instants and no sorceries in that deck, correct? So that deck shown here, you have won 44% of the games that you've won there. That one, when in a pregame conversation, you get to mention that, like, hey, this has a big restriction there. But the deck also still does really well. And this kind of gets into another thing that I think will be very actionable for a lot of listeners out there that is really important about this. You have restrictions on your decks that do probably sound like a significant downside, but when you actually get into the meat of the game, then every card that you're playing in that Caliphate deck is increasing Caliphate's power. So even though you've got a restriction, the restriction feeds into a synergy that ultimately does help you in the long run. Another example might be your Ardbert deck. Your Ardbert deck gives you benefits, the commander benefits, whenever you cast a black or a white spell. So you've made it an entirely Orzhov deck. Every spell in the deck must be both black and white.
Right. Yeah. So that's a restriction, and it's a real restriction because there's no mana rocks in there. There's, very limited draw options because I'm forced to rely on, things that are both black and white to draw. But when things break correctly my way, every single spell I cast is putting 2 counters on every single one of the creatures I control. And things can get out of hand very, very quickly if people don't have answers, particularly if I draw the right cards. I played the deck last night. I'll use it. This it's a perfect example, because I just played it, and I played it in a pot against bracket 2 and bracket 3 decks, and a bunch of things had to break my way. I had Tymna early on, which is one of the few ways I have to draw cards, so I got Tymna out. I had happened to draw a bunch of very efficient creatures, 2 drops that I could play multiple per turn and give my stuff Menace and give my stuff Vigilance while putting 2 creatures on them each time I cast it. And people just hadn't stumbled upon their removal early on. So very quickly I had a board filled with like 10, 12, 14 power creatures that had Menace and had Vigilance, and people couldn't really crack back at me. And I won that game against bracket 2 and bracket 3 decks because in that particular case, the restrictions wound up being almost all positives. And that does definitely happen with my deck sometimes, for sure.
Right. That's the thing I wanted to lean into here, is that you do have these restrictions, but they end up feeding into a synergy that actually just allows a certain degree of focus for where the rest of the deck is going to go. And that's another big lesson for folks out there too. And I think it could feed into the way that we are presenting our decks during pregame conversations as well. It's very likely that when describing, Caliphate or whatever, it's just like, yeah, there's this restriction. Don't let the restriction fool you, though. Like, this isn't something that is like so detrimental. It sounds like it might be, but it's not. And I've learned that with my Commander deck. That's a silly concept. It's very, very weird. Every card, including in my land base, has to say the word Commander on it. What a weird restriction. And yet I still play it against precons, and it holds its own. It doesn't feel like a bracket one type of thing. It is like, no, this is actually Taunt and Timness still just slap, especially when backgrounds are amplifying both of them. Even I'm playing it against even like new precons, which are souped up to the gills, and it's still holding its own. It's doing pretty well. So like, yeah, when we observe what these restrictions are that we build our decks around, when we have a strong theme, sometimes it's not actually holding us back. It's actually freeing things up in a way.
No,
and I feel like
sure.
that is really well observed by your deck data here, and a good lesson for people to take away.
And I also would dare say that like that particular brew style is beneficial to people that are as invested as we are. Like synergy, I think, amplifies itself in the hands of people who play a lot of games and brew a lot of decks and talk about Commander, for their job. like we're able to take advantage of synergies, I think, in ways that really benefit us as well. So like that's, a perfect example of something that the way we play and the way we approach this game gives us an edge for sure.
Dana, there's been a whole bunch of data so far. How about we take a break from our data and talk about other people's data? Let's challenge the stats. Talk about some of those over and underplayed cards real quick before we get into our next section, which is about how these decks performed based on the bracket system. Excited for that in the next part, but we got some stats challenge first. Guess what? Our favorite deck builder, Architect, just released a really cool new feature, uploading custom cards. A lot of folks like to homebrew or invent cards for house rules or just test out their own game designs, and Architect now has a place where you can customize your own card, name, cost, types, text box, and put it right into your deck, where it will be treated just like any other card would. You can make a card that is totally blank or upload your very own custom image of your custom card. And yes, when you make your designs, not only will they count towards all of your deck's stats, such as tracking things like your mana curve, your pips, your types, to make sure that all of the stats of your deck are accurate, to make sure you're getting the very best deck information, but also all the designs that you invent or upload are usable in the Architect playtester, which is of course the very best playtester in the biz. What's really exciting is that this new feature has also laid the groundwork for Architect to support uploading alters of cards too. So if you want to upload your own custom images of pre-existing cards, the fine folks at Architect have even more stuff cooking. So let them know if that's something that you'd like to see in the future. Check out our deck lists at architect.com/EDHRECast to keep up with all of our brews and try making your own custom cards while you're at it. That's archidekt.com/EDHRECast.
And our first listener challenge here is from Gabriel GS, and it's for the card Murmuration in its Sithis decks. Gabriel writes, looking for a win condition for my Sithis deck, my brother recommended Murmuration. I think it was an inspired suggestion since it's very similar to other win cons like Sigil of the Empty Throne or Hallowed Haunting, but it stands out in that it's activated by all spells and will create tokens if you draw into it and cast it after you play all your enchantments. It confounds me that this great card is only in 40 of almost 13,000 decks. And for those that don't know, Murmuration is 4 and a white for an enchantment. It says birds you control get +1/+1 and have vigilance. And at the beginning of your end step, for each spell you've cast this turn, create a 1/2 blue bird creature token with flying named Stormcrow. So yeah, when those birds attack, they're going to functionally be 2/3s with vigilance, and you're going to make them for every spell you cast, not just your enchantments. That's a really good card in a Sithis deck or basically any kind of Enchantress deck. And I would wager folks maybe miss out on it because they're doing a search for enchantments or auras or something and trying to find cards that care about that. And in this case, this is a card that just cares about you casting spells. That's a fantastic suggestion, and the fact that it's only in 40 decks is crazy.
Sithis decks do be casting a whole lot of spells in a single turn.
Yeah.
If you've ever seen those Enchantress chains go off, they're practically storming. So yeah, all right, interesting. I'll move to my challenge here, and I want to talk about ally decks. There are a whole bunch of new ally synergies from the Avatar The Last Airbender set. A whole bunch of folks are building Katara the Fearless right now. That is the Bant Commander 3-mana 3/3 human warrior ally that doubles the triggers of each of your allies, and there's a bunch of new toys to play with ally cards there. There's an interesting, I feel a little bit overlooked card though here that I feel is like such a famous ally that it's kind of wild that it is being overlooked in Katara decks. Tajaru Warcaller is a 5-mana 2/1 elf warrior ally that whenever it or another ally enters the battlefield under your control, your creatures get +2/+2 until end of turn. That might not sound like a lot, but boy howdy is it when you're playing an ally's deck. And especially when your commander is doubling this trigger, just casting this card means that your creatures are getting +4/+4 for that turn. But also there are so many other allies allies in this deck that are making tokens, that trigger gets doubled by Katara, first of all. So you're usually not just making one token, you're making two or more. And then each of those gives your entire team +4/+4. It is not uncommon to see a Tajaru Warcaller come down and give the entire thing +8/+8. Like, cool, I'm going to swing and you're going to hurt now. This one's only showing up in 31% of Katara decks so far. I would personally want to swap that with some of the other cards that are showing up a little bit higher, like Avatar Enthusiasts, for instance. That's a 3-mana 2/2 that gets a +1 counter on it whenever allies enter. A perfectly fine card, but I do think that there are other allies like Umara Raptor that do this same type of effect but have evasion keywords. I understand wanting to stick to an Avatar theme, that's perfectly fine, but if other non-Avatar themed allies are showing up in 50% of decks like Kabira of Angel, then I think the Tajaru Warcaller should probably come up and join them, because it's a really dang good win condition for a deck that makes this many tokens. So if you want big Creech, play Tajaru Warcaller. This card's a stomp, definitely play it in those decks.
And Challenge Stats has been brought to you by Cardsphere, the best way to turn cards from old decks into brand new decks. I took a few decks apart this year that are running cards I won't ever use outside of those specific brews. And one of the first things I did was send them out on Cardsphere. They're not doing me any good sitting in my collection, and now I've got a full Cardsphere account ready to acquire cards I want for the next deck I wind up building. You can do the same. Just go to cardsphere.com/EDHRECast to get started today.
All right, Dana, so we've gone over some of our data, our deck breakdowns in terms of like how much we played each of them and how much they won. But also, this past year in 2025, we got the advent of the brackets system, which helps us give some better language for knowing what our decks are in for, what the pod is going to be, how cutthroat we're playing versus how playful, things like that. Let's not just look at our data holistically, but actually break things down by the bracket. How many bracket 4 games did we play, and how well did we do? How many bracket 3 games did we play, and how many of those games did we win? What percentage? Stuff like that. Let's get to some of that data now.
So looking at mine here, I do have an interesting trend I noticed. The higher the bracket I went up, the higher my win percentage was. Okay. Now, some of this is skewed because I didn't play a ton of games in either 1 or 4. I was in bracket 1 for 2 games. I won 2 games in bracket 1, 33% win. Bracket 2, I played 211 games and I was at a 39% win rate. Bracket 3, 104 games and I was at 49%. And the 11 games I was at in bracket 4, 55%. So the higher the power I went, and again, granted, bracket 4 is 11 games, the better my win percentage went. And I have a theory about why that is, but I want to hear what your numbers are first.
Cool. You have a theory, I'll have a question, but yes, let's get mine.
Sure.
Here, when we look at my bracket 1 exhibition, I only played 6 games. That was my Marina Vendrell deck. I won one of them, so I have a 16% win percentage there, but again, super tiny sample size. Bracket 2 core, I played 60 games there, and I won 19 of them for a win percentage of 31%. For bracket 3 upgraded games, played 93 games in that space. I got 37 wins. That is a 39% win percentage there. And then in bracket 4, I only played 16 games that I think definitely are going to be, bracket 4 type of spaces, either with my own bracket 4 decks or decks I borrowed, yada, yada. And I won 6 of those games, which equals a 37% win percentage. So all in all, an okay showing. I do want to note, though, that us labeling each of these things as a certain bracket, there is a lot of fuzziness to this. I've done what I believe is my best effort in determining, yes, I think that this particular game represents the majority of us were in a bracket 3 space, even if there was a mix, for instance, stuff like that. There were, even in my bracket 1 space, that would often be a place where like I'm playing a bracket 1 and then everyone else is playing it too.
Yep.
Like there is a lot of fuzziness with each of these. So this is not an exact or precise science. So do take that in mind with each of these. There's a lot of our own self-reporting here, which could have plenty of error in it in terms of how we are perceiving each of these figures. So,
and for probably 1/5 of the year, there just wasn't a bracket system. And additionally, it was also tweaked, this fall as well. So like, I would guess next year when we have a much more solid system for the entire year, I'll be curious how the numbers look. But that's also going to maybe skew them a little bit just by virtue of it not existing for the first couple months of the year and then changing a little bit partway through the year as well.
So you had said you had a theory about your increasing win percentage over the course, the history of your games over 2025. Let's get to that theory.
So yeah, we talked about how like one advantage I have is being able to slide under the radar and there always being better targets. And I think that makes a big difference with some of this win percentage. I think, when I'm in bracket 2, most of the commanders tend to be kind of unassuming. Not all of them, but like there's less obvious targets than me. And as I, move up to bracket 3 or bracket 4, where most people tend to be playing the Edgar Markovs of the world, or the Krenko mob bosses, or the Yuriko the Tiger Shadow, it makes it even easier for me to hide, because there's just much flashier, much more must-kill targets in play than what I'm playing. So I think that is an advantage to me as I creep up in brackets. My opponents tend to play targets that have to get dealt with and make it easier for me to be the person who doesn't get dealt with.
The ironic thing here, Dana, is you're encouraging folks to play more hipster stuff like you in order to help out the win percentage. But if more people do that, then it will stop being the hipster thing to do. So there's the kind of a fun snake eating its own tail situation about this, where I think that's kind of a funny lesson to take away here.
And again, like, I'm not saying that entirely accounts for all of this, but just from playing, I have felt that, where like in bracket 2, I definitely notice it's harder to hide. And in bracket 3 and definitely in bracket 4, it's way easier because there's just always juicier targets. I definitely even can feel it when I play.
Well, and I think that there's an important thing for us to hone in on here. You had mentioned a sizable chunk of games here in the bracket 2 space, but then also just earlier you had mentioned that one of the decks that you had perceived as bracket 2, your Dromoka the Eternal deck, which you played a whole like over 30 games with, is one that now in retrospect you're like, probably shouldn't be calling this a 2. And we already mentioned earlier in the show that Dromoka is probably not the only example of that.
Sure.
And we each have decks that, with the benefit of hindsight, could be reclassified, which does, again, make it feel like, okay, these things that have been classified this way, maybe actually they should have been classified a different way for the purposes of measuring anything from here.
Yeah.
And that's good for us here with that hindsight to be able to like properly re-engage with that or reclassify or whatever that we need to do going forward. But for the purposes of like actually having measured all of this, it does make it all like not just a grain of salt, but like take it with a boulder of salt, because not all of our classifications here, may have ended up being accurate in retrospect. So that's a bias here that's super present that I wanted to make sure that we call out. Yeah. But I also wanted to ask how it makes us evaluate things too, So, but then with regards not just to that, but also with like the win percentage by bracket figures that we just looked at, I'm wondering how you feel about those, how those things in conjunction make you feel about those results, whether they reinforce anything for you, whether they make you want to reevaluate things, or what you make of that.
I'm just very much, this will be a good thing to look at next year. Yeah. So reclassifying Dromoka as a 3 and playing it in that space, it'll be good to analyze what that deck looks like next year when I'm always playing against bracket 3 decks versus right now. And like you said, there's definitely some fluidity there. I've definitely already played it in bracket 3 sometimes when, no one has a 2 or like they're in a mood to play something else and like, you don't worry about it too much. Right. So I'll be curious how that changes next year though, for sure.
Well, and there's a piece of that, like going back to my Conrad example, there's a thing that's kind of interesting there. Some of these figures might be the kind of thing that encourage us to be like, oh, maybe I can reclassify here. But I wouldn't apply that to my Conrad example from earlier. Conrad did not do particularly well. He only won one of the 6 games that I played in a dedicated, definite bracket 4 space. That does not mean that I'm going to then try and like tinker him down to become a bracket 3, actually. No, that's a bracket 4, man. The stuff that Conrad does is bracket 4 territory. The stuff that I want to do with him is bracket 4 territory. So I should be honoring that. And it's like, I'm not looking at any of these figures as like, oh, well, I've got to shore it up then. I have to make sure that this thing is more in line. There just inevitably are going to be some of our decks that are performing better than others. And that's a comfort that I want to have. It matters much more how it averages out over the course of many, many years. And these can be small cues to be like, oh, let me take these small things into account. Like, yeah, I think that this can be a good exercise for us to make sure that our decks have proper challenges and move them into that spaces. But it is not a thing that I would ever want to encourage myself to like, let me angle shoot on this. Oh, my deck wasn't winning enough, so therefore let me move it down or whatever. That would be a much worse habit to have, because the angle shooting is totally not the point of this, of the bracket system or of games in general.
I mean, speaking of angle shooting, I guess, is that something that you encountered much out there when you're playing? I know you play more in kind of controlled spaces, but like you get out there too and play in advanced and play in the wild. Is that something that you've run into at all this year?
Yes, but I don't want to name any names. Certainly. Sure. There have absolutely been games that I found a little bit, unsafe. And in fact, I mentioned that my Yannette deck had won 2 of the games that it played this year. One of them was a result of king making. I'm like, oh, okay, well, do I even take credit for that win? I don't know. Maybe, probably not. So there are always going to be those things that just like when we look at these numbers, just these figures flat on the page, you're not seeing all of the stories that are connected to every single one of those threads. And often our sample sizes are so small that a single win or a loss can actually throw things completely, off the top and down to the middle of the graph or stuff like that. But yeah, it's certainly come up before. Uncomfortable as it is, it's a thing to make sure that we contend with. Is it something that you've encountered a whole lot, I hope not, question mark?
I feel like I've definitely encountered it less with the bracket system. Okay. I think this year I ran into two very egregious cases, and there's no names to name. It was against strangers. The most egregious one was a situation where we were at an event playing with a brand new player playing a pre-con. The fourth player sat down and we began by saying we're playing bracket 2 decks. This person's playing a brand new pre-con. They are new to Commander in the last month. We're going real easy. The person's like, oh yeah, no problem. And like comboed out with a tutored up combo on turn 5, I think. So like, I think I ran into that situation and one more, very similar one, but like 2 out of 300 and some games where it felt like someone was doing something intentionally is a lower number than in past years. I think the bracket system definitely made it more difficult for people looking to do something untoward. It made it more difficult to do that while maintaining plausible deniability. Like the language keeps you from being like, oh, I had no idea we weren't doing this, because we've clearly discussed the brackets and you know what the breakdown is.
Gotcha. On this, like this is not like this does encompass some amount of like potential angle shooting or whatever, but this does move us to the ideas of bracket mismatches. This is something that I went through all of my games and I tracked to find games where I could clearly identify. I'd made a note to myself in my journal when I was logging it into my spreadsheet and transferring all that data. I keep a manual journal about it because it's just easier for me, but then I do like put it all into the spreadsheet later. And I noted 21 games throughout all of those with definite, understood, multiple people agreed about it being a mismatch. This was spoken aloud either before the game began or after the game concluded. There may have been more, but I don't want to speculate. I only wanted to, for this figure, count instances where there was a group understanding of a mismatch and not just like me privately speculating about someone else misrepresenting or doing a mismatch. So that's a figure I kind of want to get into now. Like, how do things break down in that realm? How did these decks do? So this is kind of related to the angle shooting. A couple of these, unfortunately, were the result of like a pub stomp type of situation, a mismatch that felt like, oh, someone brought a 4 into a 2 space. But most of these instances were something like what we described earlier of like, everyone else has a 4. I've only got a 3. Is it okay if we just play my 3 against your guys' 4? Or 6 of these 21 games I mentioned, they're all my Marina Vendrell deck because I did not find all bracket 1 spaces. It's hard to actually locate that, but they were still enjoyable times. So yeah, Dana, is it cool with you if I get into some of the data about my mismatches over the year?
Definitely.
Most of these were very like, yeah, sure, let's just play it anyway. You've only got a pre-con, we've got our 2s and our 3s or whatever, let's just go. A couple of them were unfortunate stomps, but I already mentioned Marina was one of those. Each of those bracket 1 games against usually a pot of like 2s, or a bracket 1 and a 2 or stuff like that. There's like a clear mismatch understood. My Babala Saga deck also played 3 games into deliberately bracket 4 spaces, won one of those. My Barakos deck played 2 games into spaces that were bracket 4, and I won one of those as well. I also had some things that accidentally played into a bracket 4 space. My Yanet deck, or one of the games where I borrowed a deck, was also very much like, oh, I'm playing a 2 and they're on 4s. I think one of the bigger examples, though, of playing into a mismatch space was obviously when I was playing precons. I played a lot of precons over 2025, and it was fun to play the Titus precon into a bunch of people playing their 3s. I didn't care. I just wanted to play it. It was a fun deck, and it also bunches pretty well. Or the Zergo precon, or the stuff from Target Dragonstorm. I deliberately played into those types of things several times because I was just really excited to play those, and they held their own. I won a handful of games in those spaces too. So a couple of games that I played this past year were off guard, oops, we only realized after the fact, bracket mismatch, whoopsies. I did not win those instances in any case, but overall, I did win 6 of the 21 games where there was definitely a mismatch going on with the table, which was still a perfectly normal and fun game that everyone had a good time with, at least from what was said aloud to me spoken. So, sure. Again, I'm only counting stuff that like we all like kind of like there was mutual acknowledgement from at least multiple people. So.
Yeah. I mean, I've definitely run into so the example of this, and I can't remember if I mentioned this in the show before, but a few years back when I was traveling, I stopped at an LGS, and there was a pot of 3 guys playing, and I sat with them, and we discussed, this was pre-brackets, but kind of discussed power. And at some point, turn 3 or 4, I played something. I think it was a propaganda, maybe Ghostly Prism, whatever it was. And their response was, well, I guess we can't ever attack. I'm like, well, you can remove it. And they're like, well, I guess, but like none of us are running, like they weren't running removal. It just didn't occur. The way they played the game, when something came into play, it was just there forever. And that was just their really insular meta. That's just how those guys played. And while their decks might have on paper kind of looked appropriate for what I was doing, it was not a good matchup, right? Like that. Yeah. And that's the thing that happens. You're going to once in a while just encounter a meta where maybe the decks are technically 2s or maybe they are technically 3s, but like the way everyone brews and interacts with one another in their small meta very much changes what the power matchup is. Like that's a thing that you can't help. No amount of language is going to maybe correct that either. It's a sliding scale. Like maybe what feels like a 2 and somewhere is a 3 somewhere else, and the people that are piloting those decks make a huge difference. Like we mentioned, me playing Joe Johnson's bracket 4 deck didn't play like a bracket 4 deck because I wasn't familiar with the lines. It's not my play style, whatever. That kind of stuff can't be helped, and I definitely ran into a dozen games like that this year for sure, where it was just an accidental mismatch for one reason or the other.
Yeah. And I also, of course, want to acknowledge again that there's a lot of room for user error here. Mm-hmm. And when I'm looking over that data or all of my other deck data and my normal roster of decks that I believe I have labeled correctly and that I've labeled correctly what the overall vibe of that whole pod was, that I think everyone's at the same level, it is very possible that I still, despite that, ought to adjust a few expectations of some of my decks. After all, that is the reason that I took that Genova deck apart. It couldn't stop winning, and I was like, no, I clearly am not able to gauge this well enough for me to feel like I should continue exploring further along this. It did what it's going to do, and that's all that I needed. And I don't know that it will continue to be rewarding for me if I keep on trying, because clearly I've done something wrong in terms of balancing it. There are a lot of my decks that I try very deliberately to rein in that are still performing well. And Dana, I'm sure that's something that you can agree upon as well. These are decks that you've applied a hefty restriction to. I'm not playing any spells in my blue deck. I'm not playing any artifacts in my enchantment deck, stuff like that. Those are things that you do put like limiters on yourself, but even then, if they're performing well, they're like, okay, cool, we can still trying to reset some of our expectations here, because there's plenty of room for error in terms of how we are evaluating our own data. That is something that people should absolutely keep in mind. And that when we look over all of these things can hopefully encourage us to make sure that we're finding the right and challenging spots for each of them to go into.
One final note I have here is 2 stats I kind of tracked as well that are kind of maybe unique to me. First of which was sign in blood kills.
Okay, yes, I love this. I'm sorry. That's so great, because there was some data, especially in the last episode, that I tracked that you hadn't. This is something I did not track, but Dana, I am game for it. I need to know how many sign in blood kills happened over your year. That's amazing.
So I had 4 sign-in blood kills in the year 2025. And actually, I'm kicking myself because a couple weeks after I got the 4th one, a friend of mine mentioned, oh, you should have everyone you kill with sign-in blood sign the sign-in blood. And I'm like, oh, man, I really should have. That would be it. So going forward, I will do that. But also what's weird about it is I had 3 of the 4 sign-in blood kills within the first 6 weeks of the year. So I was kind of on the pace. I'm like, I could kill 20 people with sign in blood this year if I keep this rate up. It's like the baseball player who hits 2 home runs on opening day. He's like, I'm on a pace to hit 300. Yeah. It obviously won't stick, and I only had 1 more the rest of the year. But still, I think 4 sign in blood kills was pretty impressive over the course of a year.
It's great. Yeah, that's really cool. I did not track that. No, I tracked how games ended. I don't think I had a single sign in blood kill. I did not track that. I go out of my way to track it, but I did take a note of how games ended. And now I'm jealous. I'm jealous of you, Dana. That's terrific.
I get 1 a year or so, but 4 in a year was freakish. That was very fun.
That's terrific. You mentioned there were 2 things that you tracked. What was the other?
Yeah, the other one I noted was just in my notes field, and I just made a note if I felt like me having a specific couple of utility lands changed the course of the game. So in almost all of my decks, I'm running 2, if not 3 land removal lands, the strip mine, the wasteland or something, just to deal with someone's, Cabal Coffers or their Nykthos or their even worse Gaia's Cradle or, Field of the Dead or something. So I have multiple of those in all of my decks. I always have an Abstergo Entertainment and a Scavenger Grounds. I know you hate to hear that, Joey, but to deal with
it's
the graveyard
correct.
player.
You should play them, yeah.
And a lot of times I have a Homeward Path too, although that's not in every deck, but I run that frequently. And I made a note if me having one of those things in my deck changed in some way, felt like it changed the course of the game. Like, did I have something that I felt I had to remove with a land, remove a land? Or was I playing a graveyard deck where like me having access to one of those lands to hit a graveyard made a difference? And 8% of games I had made a note that like one of those things felt like to me it impacted the game. That's a pretty high percentage, like of games that I felt were impacted positively by me having access to one of those cards. Now, you can't extrapolate that out and guarantee that like that made a difference, but it was notable enough for me to make a note that like me having the strip mine here was what enabled me to deal with that person's Nykthos that they were tapping for 9 mana.
Right.
Or this me having the Scavenger Grounds enabled me to respond to this person casting their Rise of the Dark Realms.
That is not insignificant. That is a very good lesson, a good final bit of data to end there. I think very actionable for folks, particularly because if it's the kind of thing that your color fixing is good enough that it's not going to impact your mana base, having those small moments that you could have access to where they could end up being relevant. They won't be relevant all the time, but the ability to have them locked and loaded is a good reminder to folks to make sure that when it comes to your utility lands, you're not just playing the ones that are super sexy for your own decks, you're also playing the ones that are responsible, that can help deal with, me when I'm a problem or things like that. So that's
as we noted, I am playing almost exclusively 1 and 2 color decks. So it is much easier for me to run those than if you're playing the Ur-Dragon or something where like color fixing is a much bigger deal. But for me and my list, and if you are playing 1 or 2 color decks, take a long look at those because like I definitely notice a difference in what having those in my decks did.
Yeah, that's a really good final figure. I wonder now if there are any other things that I ought to track even more of.
You could keep an eye on like how many times me having a Scavenger Grounds or Abstergo Entertainment or Bazooka Bug ruins your day.
How many times has my graveyard been exiled this year is a figure that is worth keeping note of, actually, yes. How many times was my heart broken, my day ruined, and made to feel, oh no, I'm knocked down a lot. I love that, Dana. I hate it, but I love it. I think I'm going to have to start doing that. That's a really solid idea, man. Yeah. Okay, cool. How many times have I been Bajuka bogged? Coming soon to you at the end of the next year once we've tracked our 2026 data. That's a really good suggestion. I love it. Do you have any other final notes about the data that we've gone over in this episode? Any other last minute observations or things that you want to, takeaways that you think you're carrying into this next year?
Not really. One of the things we'll do, I'm not sure if we always have our deck lists in the show notes.
We always do, for sure.
If anyone has any questions, like check out our decks, go look at our list and be like, oh, yeah, you've got this listed as a bracket 2, but like there's no way this is a 2. If you have any feedback, we'd love to hear that. If you think we're evaluating some of these decks wrong in terms of what bracket they're in, and maybe that's the reason the win percentage is higher, maybe particularly for me, but like Joey wins plenty of games too, let us know. I'd love to hear some feedback on some of those things.
I like that a lot too. Yeah. And maybe folks can take a look at that Genova list. I'll make sure that that's linked too. It was doing really well for itself. So if it did well for me, maybe it would do well for you as well. And maybe folks will have a better time with it as opposed to me, who apparently could not control myself. Dana, across these 2 episodes, we've been tracking so much data that we couldn't even just contain it in a single dang podcast episode. We've looked at a whole lot of stuff here, from game length and how games are ending last episode to now our individual stuff. I really appreciate this process of interrogating what's going on with our own stuff, trying to hold ourselves to account maybe a little bit. I appreciate this opportunity for a moment of pause, a moment of insight that then allows us to feel like we're refreshed going into the next year, to have an awareness of like what's going on in the rest of the format, and then also what is it that I want from my own decks here. There were little things that came up in this episode that I would not have initially noticed just going blithely by, I guess, such as like me thinking that I had not played my zombie deck a whole lot this year, and it turns out I had. It was just at the beginning of the year and I done forgot. Or noticing the energy of like, oh, I just built this new deck and have clearly been reaching for it a whole lot. And I've got this other new deck right beside it that I know is going to, like, all that energy is about to be pairing off right over there too. There are these little habits that when I really hyper scrutinize all of these numbers, I get to learn a lot more about myself. So thank you for joining me on this very weird journey with tracking all of our data, because it's a very fun and very revealing exercise. I hope that folks out there have enjoyed it.
Yeah, this is one of my favorite shows to do every year. I really look forward to talking about all of this and breaking it down. So thank you very much for being patient with us for 2 whole episodes of data about our decks.
And if you play games against Dana, attack him. With that, we're going to call this episode to a close. We've got to hear from all of our EDH reckoners out there. If they're tracking their data, any observations that they have, any advice for the deck lists, definitely go give those a look, linked in the description as well. Hit us up, let us know. And Dana, where is it that folks can find us on the onlines?
You can find me online at Dana Roach. I'm writing articles for EDH Rec, and you can find all of us together at patreon.com/EDHRECast.
And you can find me everywhere online, from Instagram to Blue Sky at Joseph M. Schultz. And you can find the cast online at EDHRECast. And don't forget to check out Dragon Shield and use code EDHREC, all lowercase, for a discount on the best sleeves, which also have awesome magic art or even your own custom art. Folks, we'll be back at you next week with more data and insights. But until next time, remember, EDH wreck your deck before you wreck your deck.